So every once in a while I come across a video that makes me think, who asked for this? Who wanted this? What sort of need or demand was there for this video? The video we're looking at today is a short video in which Barbie discusses racism. Yes, fucking Barbie, discussing racism. Like a bunch of black people got together one day and decided, you know who would be a good spokesperson for our interests? A franchise involving a lifeless plastic doll that's been infamous for giving young girls body image issues. You'll often hear left-wingers claim that big corporations lean right, which is kind of strange because it seems like a lot of these big corporations are all in some sort of contest to see who can be first to jump on the whole bandwagon of being woke. And this doesn't appear to be a fan-made video. This looks like it was officially produced by Mattel. Anyways, let's take a look.
Hey everybody.
Hey everyone.
So I won't harp on this too much because it's not the main focus of the video, but recently there's been this whole series of videos with Barbie Vlogging. I don't know if the intention was to capitalize on the whole fad of teleconferencing because of the pandemic. I think Sesame Street had characters vlogging for a similar purpose, but whatever. I'm not a particular fan of having characters vlogging. Unless they're being particularly expressive, or you have them doing something interesting on camera, it's usually boring to just sit there and watch characters awkwardly stare into a camera and talk. And it doesn't help that the animation's not the best. I mean, if the animation was more robust, a little more lively, they maybe could have pulled this off. But instead it's a little more stiff and awkward. Those eyes are very uncanny. I'm getting Five Nights at Freddy's vibes from those eyes. They're also real plasticky and they're kind of stiff when they move, which I guess does kind of make sense since they're dolls, but still.
So there is a huge movement going on. People, millions of people across the world are standing up to fight against racism. And they're doing this because too often and for such a long time, people have been treated unfairly, and in some cases even hurt by others because of the color of their skin.
I will say this is at least less awkward than the Arthur video, because this at least, actually takes place in a world where black people exist.
This stuff isn't easy to talk about, which is exactly why we have to talk about it.
It's a tough conversation, but I'm glad we're having it.
So look, I'm not against people having conversations about racism or race-related issues. After all, racism is an issue that we as a society are dealing with, so it can be a very helpful thing for people to talk about and understand this issue. I'm not even necessarily against the issue being brought up in children's media, because racism is a simple part of reality, so maybe it's a good thing that children understand what it is at a younger age, so that way when they get older they're better able to understand and deal with it. What sort of gets on my nerves is when people, instead of having an open conversation, where there's actual open dialogue between opposing viewpoints, insist on shoveling a pre-constructed narrative that might not be entirely based on facts or reality, sort of shielding it in an echo chamber, and claims that anyone who thinks differently or has an opposing viewpoint must be a bigot or a racist or whatever, and insist that this is having a conversation.
People might think that my life looks fine, but the truth is, I and so many other black people have to deal with racism.
Notice how she says her and so many other black people. Like, it makes sense for her to speak on behalf of her own experiences, but then she has to somehow extrapolate that to other black people. Like what, is the African American race some kind of hive mind? Are the experiences of one black person somehow comparable to every other black person? Cause while I won't deny that black people may have to deal with racism from time to time, racism, much like any other problem in life, impacts different people differently.
All the time.
Alright, so look, I'm not denying that racism is an issue in society, nor am I denying that black people, or people of any race for that matter, might have to deal with racism from time to time. But you have to admit that it's a bit of a stretch to say that black people have to deal with racism all the time. While I'm sure there is still racism out there, the left wants you to believe that racism is this huge prevalent problem in society. And at one point it was, but at this point in time, the quality of life of your average African American is pretty much on par with that of your average white. In some instances, it might actually be better.
It's really hurtful, and it can be scary and sad, and I wanted to share some stories about that today.
So we're going to use the made-up experiences of a fictional character to try and argue for why racism is an issue in the real world. Because, that's not propaganda-ish at all.
Barbie and I had a sticker selling contest on the beach last month. We split up and went different directions to see who could sell the most. Well, while I was on the boardwalk, beach security stopped me 3 times.
What?
They asked me all these questions over and over, and they even called my mom. I never told you, but that's why I sold a few stickers that day. The security officers thought I was doing something bad, even though I was doing exactly what you were doing.
You know, funny enough, I just got done talking about a video in which a girl was detained on the beach for a bullshit reason. Maybe Nikki was stopped because she was showing anatomical areas.
And remember when we were going to join that French honor club at school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I made a perfect score on the entrance test, but when the teacher, who didn't know me at all, gave me my results, he told me I only did well because I got lucky. He said he knew I couldn't speak French that well.
What? You speak French better than all of us. Why didn't you just stay in the club and prove him wrong?
I don't want to have to constantly prove and reprove myself.
Yeah, that's a good message to send to young black children. If someone else is doubting your abilities because of your skin color, just give up and don't even bother trying to prove them wrong. Because having to prove yourself again and again is just too big of a pain in the ass.
He supported you right from the beginning and didn't support me.
So the problem here is pretty much the same as was in the Arthur video. We don't actually get to see any of the context behind what happened. In both videos, we're given examples of something unfair that happened to a black person, and then it's just kind of taken for granted that it happened because they're black. Because we never actually get to see the context of what happens, we have no way to verify if that's the case. In the Arthur video, a black person was beaten or hurt or whatever, supposedly because they're black. We never actually see the event unfold. We never hear dialogue between any of the people involved. They say it's because they're black and we're just supposed to take that for granted. In this Barbie video, we have pretty much the same problem. We get an explanation of two vague stories in which something unfair happened to someone because they're black, and we're just supposed to assume it happened because they're black. Now granted, in this video, we do get a little bit more detail on what happened than in the Arthur video, but again, we never actually see the events unfold. So we have no way of knowing if her recollection of the events are accurate, or if there's any additional relevant information being left out. For example, there could be a multitude of different reasons that the beach security was stopping Nikki but not Barbie. Maybe the section of the beach that Nikki was in was more heavily patrolled than the section Barbie was in. Maybe Nikki was doing or saying something that aroused suspicion. Maybe the beach security was stopping people other than Nikki for similar reasons, but Nikki just had it in her head that she was stopped because she's black. Same thing with the story regarding the French club. There could have been a multitude of different things that made that French teacher feel the way he did about Nikki. Or maybe the French teacher was just having a bad day that day. Does that excuse the French teacher being a dick? Not really, but it could potentially mean that something other than racism was at play in this situation. A very simple way to give us, the viewer, a better context of what happened would be to actually depict the situations as they happened. Maybe as Nikki is sharing her story, just have a quick flashback clip play. I mean, in the Arthur video, it kind of makes sense why they can't actually show what happened. It supposedly involved a bloody beating of some kind. But the situations described here seem fairly benign enough to show in a kids show. Your goal in this situation is to get us to sympathize with the characters. The best way to do that is to provide as much context as possible.
Usually, when I talk about these things, people make excuses. They say things like, oh, well, maybe you should have had a permit for selling on the beach.
I will say this is one thing they do incidentally get right, that a lot of this government red tape is disproportionately enforced against black people, and in a lot of cases was designed from the onset to prevent black people from becoming successful.
But those are just excuses. People did these things to me because I was black, and they made the wrong assumptions about me.
So notice how she just immediately jumps to the conclusion that it's because she's black. She doesn't say that she feels it may potentially be because she's black. No, she just full stop claims it's because she's black. And if you raise the possibility that it could potentially be something else, you're just making excuses. What they're basically encouraging kids to do here is see racism in everything, and not critically evaluate whether or not something is actually racist. Basically, they're teaching kids SJW logic.
And they don't make those assumptions about white people like me.
Yeah, 'cause nobody ever makes assumptions about white people. Yeah, white people never have assumptions made about them ever at all. Totally not something that ever happens.
And that's not fair, because that means that white people get an advantage that they didn't earn.
You know, as a white person, I'd really like to know more about this white privilege that liberals go on about, 'cause I'm not seeing it. I'm white and I have to bust my ass to get ahead in this world just as much as anyone else. No one's handing me anything on a silver platter.
And black people get a disadvantage that they don't deserve.
Yeah, because black people never get special advantages over white people. You know, like affirmative action, minority scholarships at universities. Those totally aren't things that exist at all.
Exactly. It's really serious. Some people even get hurt when others think the wrong things about them.
Yeah, agreed. That's totally true. When black people are told that white people are the evil devil who keep putting them down, a lot of them go on riots and destroy entire neighborhoods, which isn't good for white or black people.
That's exactly why people are marching.
Marching and flipping cars and lighting shit on fire.
Because when enough of us stand together, people pay attention.
Right. Because when we don't say anything, we're just letting it continue.
So this is a common argument you'll hear from the left, that silence is violence, that not doing something to stop racism is just as bad as being racist. And while I'm not against people speaking out and taking action against what they feel to be an injustice, quite frankly, certain people are just stupid. They don't understand the issue or know what they're doing, and them getting involved could just make the situation worse. While I'm not against activism, some people really are better off just keeping their mouths shut.
Well, you listening and being supportive, that's helpful.
So in all fairness, there are some positive messages here. A very simple and effective way to help is to just listen and be supportive. Not just with racism, but anytime you have a friend who may be struggling with something, just maybe take a little bit of time to talk to them and show some support. It might not seem like much to you, but to them it can really make a difference. On top of being supportive, it's also a good way to learn different perspectives on issues. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but one good way to learn about racism is to talk to other people who've experienced it and kind of put yourself in their shoes. Imagine what it would be like if you were going through what they went through.
It's important to keep reading and learning more about Black history. And if someone is being treated unfairly, stand up for that person. If we all work together, we can make a big difference.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me today. With us.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's necessary.
So what are my final thoughts on this video? Well, in all fairness, there are some positive messages. There are messages about understanding and empathy, about taking a stand for what you believe is right, about white and black people coming together to understand each other and to work together to make the world a better place. These messages I can get behind. But at the same time, there's a lot of not so positive messages. Messages that are based on faulty information or that are actually harmful. For example, this idea that white people get these special privileges. Kind of strange that they talk about how it's unfair to make assumptions about black people, but then suddenly turn around and make assumptions about white people. And the idea that black people are disadvantaged, and that black people shouldn't bother trying to succeed and prove people wrong. You see, when the left goes on about white privilege and black people being disadvantaged, I feel that this is kind of a toxic ideology for them to spew around. Because when young black kids hear that, they'll probably think, well, gee, I'm disadvantaged, I might as well not even try to succeed in life. I feel that's a really bad message to send to black kids. Now, are there certain challenges that black people face disproportionately compared to other groups? I'm sure there are. I'm sure that every group in society has certain challenges that they face disproportionately. But the thing is, black people can and often have succeeded in spite of these additional challenges they face. And that's the message we should be sending. Not, oh well, it's too hard to prove the racists wrong, so let's not even try. They also kind of send the message that critically evaluating a situation to determine whether or not it's actually based on racism is just making up excuses, which I feel kind of sends the message that people should see racism in everything, and critically evaluating whether or not a situation is actually racist is just making up excuses. Which quite honestly is probably going to have the opposite effect of what you want. That's likely to drive a wedge between white and black people, as opposed to bring them together, if everyone just has to see racism in everything and not even question it. And finally, this idea that just sitting by is letting it happen. Again, I'm not against people being active in addressing the problems in our society. I actually think it can be a very good thing. But if you don't fully understand the problem and know what you're doing, there's a very high likelihood you'll just make things worse. You're more likely to create harm rather than benefit. So this isn't the worst take on racism I've ever seen, but it still has a lot of toxic messages and propaganda in it. Anyways, what did you guys think of this video? Did you agree with the points that were made? Did you disagree? Do you think this video mostly sends positive messages, negative messages? What are your thoughts? I'm curious to know in the comments. As always, this has been Philosophy Possum making stupidity play dead. Until next time, have a good one.